This video is brought to you by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino.
I was having your boy Rico from RicoScores, and as you can see, we're here to do a breakdown, reaction, and analysis to the first depth chart that the Washington Commanders have released in 2024, leading up to this Jets joint practice. By the time most of y'all are watching this video, but the joint practice is tomorrow and the preseason game will be Saturday, and I will be live streaming that. Now, first of all, this video is sponsored by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino, but we got to dive into every single player on this depth chart. I also want to compare it to the prediction that I came out with and see where I was wrong. And we have so many things to talk about, so many layers to break down, because we also got to even talk about why this depth chart may not be a good reflection of what the actual real depth chart is right now. We're going to break all of that down and more. But before we do, make sure you stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned for all of the content. Just to let y'all know, so much is on the way. I will be breaking down that Jets joint practice Thursday, August 8th, like I do with any other Commanders training camp practice, where we do every single position group, every player that contributed. And I'm always going to keep it 100 with y'all. I'm going to talk about when players do well. I'm also talk about when players do bad as well. So make sure y'all stay tuned for all of that. And again, I will be live streaming the preseason game against the Jets. I'm going to start live streaming an hour before the game starts. So the game starts at 12. I'm live streaming at 11 a.m. so we can talk about a lot of different things, what our expectations are. And of course, during the game, I will be breaking down a lot of the most notable players that will be playing. Of course, Jaden Daniels, but also like wide receiver competition and offensive line. Are we healthy? What do the starters look like against the Jets? Really good defensive line, all that type of stuff. So stay tuned for all of that. Instead of wasting more of y'all time, let's go ahead and dive into this video, man. Let's get it. Adam. Now, before we dive all the way into this video, I do have some disclaimers for you. First of all, Dan Quinn even joked about how this first depth chart release was like literally done by the PR boss, Sean. That guy had a big part into it, as far as like how this depth chart was put together, who they put where and things like that. John Com also confirmed in his podcast that this is something that the Commanders are literally forced to do by the NFL, and that they pretty much just let the PR staff basically do it based off of what they saw in practice. And then Dan Quinn and maybe some other coaches, who knows, came in and made a couple of modifications to it. But my main point is, do not read too much into this depth chart. First of all, it's early August, but also, again, according to John Com, Dan Quinn, and a couple of other sources, it sounds like the Commanders coaches don't really take this depth chart too seriously. Again, the PR team had a lot to do with this depth chart. And then disclaimer number 2, this depth chart is also specifically for this upcoming Jets preseason game. And some guys may specifically be in one spot on the depth chart for this preseason game and then be somewhere else on the depth chart for the Dolphins preseason game for literally, and he hasn't gotten any better or worse, just simply because they want to see guys maybe in different situations. Like, for example, some of the rookie draft picks are higher on the depth chart because they may actually just want to see, can these guys hang with the starters? Maybe the coaches are like, all right, even though this guy isn't already like a second string edge rusher just based on production if we had a game tomorrow, but we're gonna put him second string on the depth chart because we need him to go out there and play with the higher level guys on the Jets to see if he can hang, to see if this guy is like really up for it and things like that. Let's put him to the test type of situation. So this is not very reflective of the actual depth chart that we have today for this team. That, like, if Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury, and Joe Wood Jr. came together and made a depth chart, I don't think it would look exactly like this right now. I mean, we have notable players like Emmanuel Forbes that has clearly been getting more snaps at corner than Michael Davis at the very least, and he's a backups corner. So we're going to dive into all that. Of course, we're going to go position group by position group when we're breaking this down. We're not going to look at it from this view because I just feel like it's too zoomed out for y'all. And then also, even just like how the receiver, there's one set of receivers at the top, and then there's a whole nother set of two receivers, a whole nother two sets of receivers down here. I don't like how that's separated. So I just took some time on my own and then like screenshotted this and then put it together to where you're looking at it position group by position group. I hope y'all appreciate it. But again, this may not be exactly what the depth chart is for real. This is just what the depth chart is going into this Jets preseason game. I really want to emphasize that. Also, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but according to this depth chart right here, we have 12 starters on offense and 12 starters on defense. And Dan Quinn even addressed it himself. He was like, yeah, like if it were up to me, we would have 15 starters for both sides because we're so early in the process. Plus, we're going to be very rotational, like just depending on matchups, but offensively and defensively, depending on who we're going against. It may be certain players getting more snaps this week than another week type of situation. So I thought it was interesting. I felt like this was something that maybe not a lot of people noticed, but we have 12 starters according to this depth chart. So that's just another reason why not to take it too seriously. I mean, you can even just tell by the fact that Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler are two separate positions. They have Brian Robinson, they say it as like the regular running back, and then they have these guys as the third down pass catching receiving running backs as like a separate part of the depth chart. And you know, I guess even though they technically wouldn't be out there at the same time, even though sometimes they may, there probably will be some situations where Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler are out there at the same time. That's quite likely. Or even maybe one of those running backs are out and then Ben Sinnott acts as like a fullback back there with the quarterback and the running back as well in some type of shotgun where Jaden Daniels has both of those guys to the sides of him. So, you know, we're going to get creative, but this is more so just to show you like this is a separate set of running backs here. Instead of just having one running back slot and then we just have 6 names back to back to back, they wanted to separate the fact that we have pure in between the tackles running backs and then we have some pass catching running backs. Even though I thought Michael Wiley's more of a pass catching running back as well, but it is what it is. Not going to dive into that too much. But either way, again, I wanted you to notice that according to this depth chart, we have 12 starters each. So don't take this way too seriously. Now let's dive into every single position group and break each thing down. All right, so starting with the quarterbacks, of course, Jaden Daniels is the starter. I feel like we all should have expected this. Not only has he been like just straight up the better quarterback, I've talked about this so many times. I spent so many minutes and hours just talking about how and why Jaden Daniels is already better than Marcus Mariota, even in advanced, nuanced ways that Marcus Mariota should be better than him as far as like going through progressions and understanding of the offense and pre-snap judgments and analysis and even changing protections at the lines, things like that. I'm not going to dive into that here, but even just on top of that, Jaden Daniels has also been getting more of the starting snaps, especially as of late. He's pretty much been exclusively with the starters from what I've heard the past couple of practices, so we may be making that move. Now, of course, Dan Quinn hasn't necessarily announced him as the starter, and again, like I've been saying, I wouldn't go about it this way. I would just go ahead and say Jaden Daniels the starter. Let him get as many reps with the ones as possible leading up to his rookie season. I feel like every rep counts. That's just me. But I also understand why Dan Quinn is preaching this whole competition thing throughout the entire roster. I completely agree with it everywhere else. It's just like Jaden Daniels, especially if Jaden Daniels is like a 5-year season vet, then I'll be like, yeah, go ahead. Then, I mean, but even then it would be less likely that you wait to name him a starter. But my point is the fact that Jaden Daniels is a rookie. This is his first year in the NFL. This is his first training camp. I feel like the impact of every rep that he could get with the starters is magnified compared to any other further season in his career. Like by his 5th year, every rep won't weigh as much and won't be as impactful as this first training camp that he's having right now. So I personally would just go ahead and name him the starter, give him every rep possible. But for the rest of the roster, perfectly fine with what Dan Quinn is doing because his whole message is we're preaching competition. Everybody, even guys like Terry McLaurin and Jonathan Allen, yeah, you were starting for the previous Washington Commanders, but not this one. So everybody needs to go out there and show why they deserve their snaps, their rotation, and their starting role if they're going to earn it. Even again, guys like Terry McLaurin and Jonathan Allen, and even Terry McLaurin, I believe it was, said he loved how this is going. Like he's not treated differently from any other receiver on the depth chart. Out of all of the 13, 14 receivers we have on roster, Terry McLaurin said he loves the fact that everybody is treated completely equal and you have to go out there and earn those snaps. I mean, voluntary OTAs, we were mixing it up with Terry McLaurin, backup starters, whatever. We were really getting the feel to see like who actually are the real starters. Now, of course, guys like Terry McLaurin and Jonathan Allen, didn't take them long to show that they should be the starters and they will be the starters, but I like the fact that everybody started from step one when this regime started practices in voluntary OTAs a couple of months ago. So again, I like the logic. I just feel like the quarterback position just simply because Jaden Daniels is a rookie, and this training camp practice is just every rep he gets is magnified, is multiplied in impact, just simply because this is his first go around of it. That's the only one I'm like, man, I would just go ahead and name him the starter, let him go. By the way, Marcus Mariota right now is your backup, which is interesting because that's kind of assumed, but from what I've been hearing in practice, it sounds like Jeff Driscoll has looked better than Marcus Mariota has. But at the same time, Jeff Driscoll is exclusively with the backups. Marcus Mariota is sometimes going against the starting defense with guys like Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, and Bobby Wagner, Frankie Louvu, all of those guys. So maybe that's why he's looked worse and has thrown more interceptions than probably any other quarterback in practice, because maybe Jeff Driscoll and Marcus Mariota are comparable in skill set, but Jeff Driscoll's going against the second stringers and third stringers. Marcus Mariota's going against starters and second stringers. So naturally, he's probably set up to look worse just off of that alone. But again, I do want to emphasize the fact that I've heard multiple sources say that Jeff Driscoll has looked like the better quarterback, and Sam Hartman has even put together some pretty good days. It does kind of suck because if anybody's not going to make it, we're more than likely going to keep 3 quarterbacks because of the new rules set up to where, like, going into this season for the first time, it's just like, why not keep 3 quarterbacks? It's literally set up for you to keep 3 quarterbacks no matter what. But Sam Hartman, I think they're going to end up keeping him. Marcus Mariota is, again, second string, even though he doesn't necessarily look good and maybe not necessarily deserving of it. So it seems like Jeff Driscoll may end up being the odd man out, even though he has looked better than Marcus Mariota so far this training camp. But we'll see. We still have a lot of training camp to go. We don't play a regular season game until September. So I know we're trying to jump to conclusions and really analyze everything very deeply, but we still have a long way to go. Things can change. That's another part of all of this. Again, like with my disclaimer, like another reason why not to take this seriously is because we still have so many weeks until it's time to cut it down to 53 people, and things can change. Somebody can get better, somebody can get worse, you know, injuries happen or whatever, knock on wood, stuff like that. You just never know. So again, this is the first draft of all of this. Now moving on to the running backs, Brian Robinson is obviously your starting in between the tackles running back. Austin Ekeler is your starting receiving back. But I mean, when it comes to who would play the most in any given game, I think it's matchup based. But I also, like I've said in my projection and my prediction video for this depth chart that I did a couple of nights ago, that I feel like Austin Ekeler may be a slightly more dependable now, just because Brian Robinson had that one time that he allowed Mike Sanford still to poke the ball out from behind. But Brian Robinson has the higher ceiling. I think when not fumbling, and that's crazy too, because Austin Ekeler was known as a way bigger fumbler coming into this training camp than Brian Robinson was. It just so happens that Austin Ekeler has really emphasized ball security this training camp compared to any other time in his career. I mean, he was a fumble machine. He was a touchdown machine for the Chargers, but he was also a fumble machine. But Brian Robinson has the one lone fumble between the two that I've heard of. So Austin Ekeler may be a slightly safer choice, especially, again, the thing that I really want to point out, and I haven't heard that Brian Robinson has been bad in pass protection, but one of those Terry McLaurin deep bomb touchdowns to Terry McLaurin in practice was allowed to happen because Austin Ekeler did a great job picking up a blitz against Bobby Wagner. So maybe Austin Ekeler is a safer bet to get more snaps right now, but ultimately Brian Robinson's more explosive. He's extremely underrated in the receiving game. I just think he will be the better running back. I wouldn't be surprised by week 1 he's the better running back, but it's just this first depth chart. I mean, if we're just really trying to split hairs here, Brian Robinson is probably like 1AB. Like Austin Ekeler is 1AA and Brian Robinson's 1AB. It's that close, just simply because of that fumble and Austin Ekeler's proven pass protection that I've heard so far. Now, if I would have gone to every practice, maybe I would have seen something different, because I'm hearing about Brian Robinson being very explosive. He has a higher ceiling than Austin Ekeler. I think ultimately he will be the better running back for us throughout the season. It's just a matter of when. Of course, your backups are Chris Rodriguez and Jeremy McNichols. Nothing surprising here. I was hearing a lot of buzz from Jeremy McNichols before we put on pads. Is looking like the clear, like the super duper obvious third best running back on the roster. But ever since we put on pads, Chris Rodriguez started to step up, and that makes sense. Jeremy McNichols is a receiving back. no pads on, making moves out in space, catching the ball, he's supposed to look better. But once we put the pads on, Chris Rodriguez, the bruiser, and I feel like it doesn't go noticeable enough. Now, Chris Rodriguez has had a fumbling problem, but I feel like it doesn't go noticed enough that Brian Robinson played behind an Alabama offensive line. I still love Brian Robinson. I think he's a great running back, but Chris Rodriguez was playing behind a Kentucky offensive line with bad quarterback play. At the safest you can say, the best compliment you can give towards it, the most positive light you can give it is at best inconsistent quarterback play. So teams were not only stacking the box against them, but Kentucky's O-line was usually worse than any defensive line they were going up against, playing against Georgia, Alabama, whatever. Chris Rodriguez was going through it in college. So this is a guy that knows how to get it out the mud and make something out of nothing, probably better than anybody else in his roster. I love Brian Robinson, but Alabama's offensive line has always been dominant. He's still a great running back, but nobody went through what Chris Rodriguez went through in college, just in comparison to what the offensive line he had in front of him, the quarterback he had next to him, compared to the defenses that he went against in the SEC, man. He had a completely different experience than Brian Robinson in college, so I feel like we should not sleep on Chris Rodriguez. Got to work on that fumbling problem, but as a running back, I like his talent. Now, moving on, and I've also been hearing things just, before we actually move all the way on, I've been hearing good things about Michael Wiley and Austin Jones. Remember, one of them was with Cliff Kingsbury back at USC just this last season in college. So you never know, man. We'll see how that goes. Then wide receiver wise, again, like I said earlier, I took the time to actually take screenshots of these and put it together to where the receivers aren't separated by the offensive line and the tight ends for no reason. I like the fact that I prefer to look at it like this so you can see them all stacked on top of each other. Now, of course, the most obvious thing is that Olamide Zaccheaus is one of the starting wide receivers over both Luke McCaffrey and De'Ami Brown. And this is another example of what I mean when I say don't read into these depth charts too much. Now, Olamide Zaccheaus has been balling out. I've been talking about this in my breakdown since voluntary OTAs. I was talking about it since months ago, that Olamide Zaccheaus has been standing out. So I'm not necessarily surprised at how high he is on the depth chart based on his talent. I'm more so surprised because based on everything I've heard and seen, De'Ami Brown is the one that's been getting most of the snaps with the starters. Usually when the starters are out there, more times than not, it's Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, De'Ami Brown. And then Luke McCaffrey and Olamide Zaccheaus have kind of been the guys with the next group. Even though Olamide Zaccheaus has gotten time with the starters, maybe even more than Luke McCaffrey, I think honestly it may be Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, De'Ami Brown, then Olamide, then Luke. But of course, ideally Luke will work his way up to third. But as of today, based on everything I've heard and seen, I think De'Ami Brown is still third. I'm not exactly sure what the strategy is here for putting Olamide this high. Maybe they want to test him out. Maybe when we get to this Jets game, they want him out there with the starters versus the Jets starters against guys like Sauce Gardner to see what he can do, to see if he can hang, to see if he deserves to be on this roster. Because I'm not sure how much they like him as a returner. So if he can't truly stand out, super duper stand out as a receiver, he probably may be on the way out. I mean, he's not even on the depth chart when you're looking at the return part of the depth chart. So this is a guy that if he's not a really good slot receiver, because a lot of these guys are the same guy, especially if you take away return ability from Casmer Allen, Mitchell Tinsley, and all of these guys, Jamison Crowder, Olamide Zaccheaus, they're all small slot receivers, shifty, get open guys. We don't have a bunch of diversity in our receiver group. Bryson Tremaine is the only tall guy, and then Terry McLaurin plays bigger than his size, but he's still fairly small. De'Ami Brown plays bigger than he is, same thing. But a lot of these guys are just all small, shifty receivers. So Olamide, if you're going to make the team, that means that we're not going to keep other shifty receivers. And are you good enough as a receiver to basically outdo a guy like Casmer Allen, who's competing for starting kick returner and punt returner right now, or Jamison Crowder, who's also competing for starting punt returner, who was literally the starting punt returner for this team last year as soon as they picked him up? So Olamide, you got to show us something in this preseason. This is one of those situations where I wouldn't be surprised where he goes from starter in this depth chart to way further down the line by the third depth chart. And I feel like people are going to be surprised, yo, he was just starting a couple of weeks ago. What happened? But again, I think the logic is let's throw him out there with the starters against the starting defense of the other team and see if he can hang. Because again, Olamide, as of right now, you better be a really good slot receiver for us to keep you, because that means that we would be taking your slot receiver ability over the slot receiver ability plus receiving ability of Jamison Crowder, Casimir Allen, Byron Pringle, and some of those other guys on the roster. So we'll see how that goes. Bryson Tremaine, I'm not surprised by how far down he is on the depth chart, even though some people may be surprised that he's ahead of guys like Davion Davis and even like my boy Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, Byron Pringle, and those guys. But Bryson Tremaine has been making plays. Even beyond the fact that I've been screaming since last year that Bryson Tremaine should make this roster just because of his height alone. He's the tallest receiver in our entire wide receiver group by at least a minimum of 2 inches of height. But even beyond that, he's been making a lot of plays. And not only just making plays, but making plays deep down the field. He's been one of our best and most consistent deep targets so far in training camp, which is really crazy. And then he's also a great special teams guy, especially according to Logan Paulson. So that's the guy that's probably going to make this team. I'm rooting for Casimir Allen because I liked what he's done in kick returns and punt returns. Dan Quinn even went out of his own way to say that after the first practice of pads that we had over a week ago, after that first practice of pads, he pointed out the fact that John Bates on offense, Jonathan Allen, Dorrance Armstrong on defense, and then specifically Mike Sanverstill and Casimir Allen in special teams stood out the most to him. So Casimir Allen probably has somewhat of a lead on the return position, so he may even make the team because of that. Even though it doesn't reflect it in the depth chart, which we're going to get to a little later, but he is, I think, just based on what Dan Quinn has said, one of our starting kick returners as of today. But again, he's not on the depth chart. So again, I don't know exactly what to take seriously. Do we not take Dan Quinn's word seriously, or do we not take the depth chart seriously? Maybe a mix of both. But either way, interesting receiver group. My Georgia boy, Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, you see him towards the bottom of the roster. I mean, I'm not really surprised. I keep hearing about him dropping passes. He looked great in that rookie minicamp. Dan Quinn even started to take a liking to him. And then he got a little banged up, and then he came back healthy and has not really stood out. So we'll see what happens there. I doubt he makes the team. Immensely doubt it right now. And then Davion Davis is weird because he's been out there with the starters quite a bit as a receiver and has even gained somewhat of a pretty good chemistry with Jaden Daniels. They have him far down that depth chart, so I don't know what that exactly means. Sounds like he's not going to make the team, but I thought he was doing better than that to be that far down the depth chart. I thought he would at least be ahead of a guy like Mitchell Tinsley, who has stood out, but I've heard more about Davion Davis than even Mitchell Tinsley. But it is what it is. We'll see, man. Again, this depth chart, we don't want to really catch a headache thinking about it too much. And then moving on to the tight end group, I apologize for it being so small, but they got it so like the whole row so long and then it's short, so that's kind of just how it ended up looking. But either way, Zach Ertz is obviously a starter. I mean, that should be obvious. John Bates is second because of his blocking ability, and that's really just it. Then Ben Sinnott is like a healthy mix of both. Ben Sinnott, ultimately, we hope that he can be the blocker of a John Bates and the receiver of a Zach Ertz. And hopefully sooner rather than later, maybe even sometime his rookie season, sometime during this regular season, he is our best tight end because he can do both. Zach Ertz, decent blocker, all right, like he can handle himself, but you know, he's more so here for the receiving ability, veteran leadership, and things like that. John Bates here for blocking purely. If he's catching the ball, you're gonna have to scheme him open because there's no way in life he's getting open on his own. So that's really just like a second tackle on the field almost that can occasionally go out there and catch a wide open pass. And then, so Ben Sinnott, you're just hoping that he brings the best of both worlds from those guys into one body, along with the versatility to play fullback, even inline tight end, wide tight end, like a big slot, like a Mike Gesicki, like he did in college at times. And even in college, sometimes he was out wide as like an X receiver. This guy can literally play everywhere. And we're seeing some flashes of him making one-handed catches in camp. He's had a few drops, I've heard, but he's also had some flashes. And Dan Quinn even talked about like the main thing that he's noticed about Ben Sinnott was his contested catch ability and how physical he's been. And right now, Ben Sinnott and John Bates are your most physical tight ends out of all of these tight ends you're looking on the screen right now. Those are your two most physical when it comes to blocking. So if we're like in a goal line situation, you want to bring Brian Robinson in and punch the ball into the end zone. We're 1 yard away. Those are the two tight ends that'll be on the field. I love Zach Ertz, but you need that blocking from Ben Sinnott and John Bates to get the job done if you really just want to punch a defense in the mouth. Then Cole Turner, I mean, it sucks because Armani Rogers is already gone. I probably should have scratched his name out. Y'all know I'm hurt about the Armani Rogers situation, but either way, that means Kolson Yankov moves up the depth chart. But right now, if we only keep 4 tight ends, it sounds like Cole Turner may be the guy. We may be. We'll see where that goes. Then offensive line wise, I apologize for, we got the the Bet US in the way. Let me see if I can go ahead and move that real quick. Let's go ahead and move that down so we can see the left tackle. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We gotta make sure it look good. You know what I'm saying? Y'all behind the scenes right now. Either way, your starting offensive line. Let's go ahead and get that out the way. From left to right, Brandon Coleman, that's ridiculous. Like, if we go up against the Jets and he really proves to be like a franchise left tackle already as a third-round rookie, Adam Peters literally deserves a statue. Franchise quarterback and franchise left tackle in one draft is so rare. I mean, Lord have mercy. Not even before we're even talking about Johnny Newton and Mike Samberstill, Ben Sinnott, who I just hyped up, Luke McCaffrey, who I'm excited about, Jordan McGee, we're going to talk about later. I mean, Frankie Louvu loves him. Feels like he's going to be able to contribute for us immediately as a linebacker. Like this, I'm not saying the entire rookie class are just full of home runs, but to just alone, ignoring all of the rest of the picks, you come away with a franchise left tackle in the third round and a franchise quarterback in the first round. That draft is a huge success, regardless of what happens to any other draft pick. So Brandon Coleman at left, but again, we got to see if he can pass this Jets test, because this is arguably one of the best defensive lines he's going to go against, not only in the preseason, but really the entire season. They have a dominant defensive line. It's actually really scary. So, especially if Hassan Riddick isn't holding out, it could get real crazy. So, Brandon Coleman, you will definitely be going up against better edge rushers against the Jets than you've been going against in practice. So, if you can show me that you can hang with them boys as well, I'm very confident in our chances of winning some games this season. I'm not gonna lie, Brandon Coleman looks good against the Jets. I probably up my projection for this team 1 win just off of that alone, because left tackle is one of my biggest concerns for this team entering the season. If Brandon Coleman is a really good left tackle, you don't even have to be a Pro Bowl level. Just be better than Cornelius Lucas or Charles Leno, and we're cooking with fish grease this year. But either way, Brandon Coleman is starting left tackle. Nick Allegretti is just starting left guard. Tyler Biotish is just starting center. Samuel Cosme is just starting right guard, even though he has illness right now. Can't wait for him to come back. And Andrew Wiley, I'm assuming, is still your starting right tackle, even though he's been out because of tightness for like a week now. I believe he's still your starting tackle, because Trent Scott has been getting snaps as like the starting, because just the most recent practice we had a couple of days ago, Brandon Coleman was out. We don't know exactly for what, but it didn't seem like it was anything that crazy. I believe Nick Allegretti may have been out as well. Somebody else was out. We only had 2 out of the 5 starters out there. Actually, that was it. Brandon Coleman was out, Samuel Cosme was out due to illness, and Andrew Wiley's been dealing with tightness for a week. So the only starters we had out there were Nick Allegretti and Tyler Biotish. And then so you had Trent Scott out there with the starters. Cornelius Lucas still, even with all of those injuries, I believe he may have started at right tackle or left tackle, but only due to those injuries. But Trent Scott, I heard, had a bunch of holds in practice, like did not look good out there with the first team at all. So this is a guy that we can't depend on him. Cornelius Lucas, we'll see what you do, even though when we didn't have as many injuries, it seemed like Trent Scott got to work with the first team more than Cornelius Lucas did. So they may be higher on Trent Scott than Cornelius Lucas. And at the same time, I've been hearing bad things about Trent Scott. So right now, our backup tackle situation does not look and sound good. Also, I do want to point out the fact that we did sign some additional tackles who are not on this depth chart. But, I mean, they're so far down the depth chart right now, we're just bringing them in to be camp bodies because of all of the injuries that we have, that I just didn't even necessarily feel like it was necessary to really make sure I added those guys. So I apologize for that. But, yeah, man, I mean, that's basically it. Your backup interior offensive lineman, Michael Dieter's great as a backup interior offensive lineman. He could honestly start at center for a couple of teams around the NFL. So that's great depth there. Chris Paul, I love him as a left guard. If he has to start, I'm cool with it. My only problem is him getting to the second level blocking, but it's just blocking it with a normal set of 5 offensive linemen, and you're just pass protecting, you're run blocking and trying to road grades. I like him there. It's just when he has to go to the second level to block linebackers and DBs, that's when he starts to look a little funny. Other than that, though, he's pretty solid depth. Julian Goods-Jones, I've heard hasn't been that good at all. Mason Brooks is a talented interior offensive lineman that I'm still excited about. Braden Daniels, again, I compared him to the guy from Office Space with the red stapler that they just kept moving around because they just needed the space. Braden Daniels just been kind of just tossed around here. Do this. You're here anyway. Here, just go do this. He's been like the equivalent in here. Just go shuffle these papers around. Like they just kind of have him out there, which takes me to and Alex Akambulu is now released on an injury injury designation because he got carted off, so he's not even here anymore. But my point is, Ricky Strongberg, I'm very surprised that he's this far down the depth chart. I mean, like, what happened to Ricky Strongberg? I know this regime didn't draft him, so they have no attachment to him, but several players on the team last year literally said that Strongberg looked like one of the team's best interior offensive linemen by the end of the season. And I did notice that he did look better at guard than center. We originally drafted him to be a center, but he did look better at guard. And so I'm curious what happened for him to land this far down the depth chart. Like, how are you behind Julian Goods-Jones? I've heard nothing but terrible things about him. I don't know how you're behind him on the depth chart. For some reason, this regime just may not be into Ricky Strongberg. We'll see how that goes. But before we move on to the defensive side of the ball, let my sponsors talk to you, and then I got to talk to you after that as well.
Michael Vick at BetUS.com. Catch an incredible 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits, plus 10% gambler's insurance. BetUS, my online sportsbook and casino.
Now, you already heard from Mike Vick. Now, I got to tell you this spill as well, man. Are you looking for a new book this football season? It should be BetUS for sure. Like, stop playing. First of all, they have the fastest payouts in the industry, and I know y'all want y'all money fast. I do too, man. And when you sign up through me, go click my link in the description of the video and the pinned comment. You can get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000, or even 200% crypto deposit bonus with your first deposits as well. And make sure you check out my BetUS link again in the description below. Your boy RicoScores got you every time. It is also a very easy and fast deposit and withdrawal process. I mean, you don't even got to worry about that part. And that's probably the part that most people worry about when it comes to the betting services. How do I get my money? BetUS is great for that. They also have 24/7 personalized service, 365 days a week, a year. So they're always there for you. Like, even when you're off of work, they on 24/7, whatever you need, even leap years. You know what I'm saying? And they have live wagering on all games, all of them. Name it. They got it. Promise you. And to me, they also have the best betting variety in the business as well. And even if you somehow miss on your bets, you can even get 10% back on your net losses twice a year. That's forgiveness. I know y'all love that. I know I do. And on top of that, did you know that BetUS can even give you your very own personal account manager? Now, who else is doing that, man? Come on now. So y'all my people, they my people. I feel like y'all need to rock with each other. Off top, just go on and hit that website for show. Again, link in the description. Go rock with them, man. Now let's get to the defensive side of the ball, starting with the interior defensive line. We have Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen as your starters, Jazon Newton and John Ridgway as your backups, and I'm not surprised there at all. I feel like this was the most obvious one. I mean, the only real surprise is that maybe Phidarian Mathis is higher than I wouldn't have been surprised. I assume Phidarian Mathis would probably be third in line, but based off what I've heard in practice, I wouldn't have been surprised if he was even further back than that. Phidarian Mathis has a very large hill to climb to make this 53-man roster. I'm not gonna lie, it's not looking good for Buddy. It's looked bad for him even since he started playing last year. He played a lot of the season last year once he got back healthy, and it just never looked good, and so far it's not looking good as well. We'll see where that goes. Interior defensive line, no real reason to really spend too much time on this. I'm really excited about Jazon Johnny Newton. I feel like he's gonna play maybe not the same exact amount of snaps as a Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen, but it's going to be close. Like I said, for example, in one of my other videos, I wouldn't be surprised if Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen play like 30 snaps each, and then Jazon plays like 25. Like, he's going to be a part of that rotation. I think he's so great. I think he's going to be so great to where if you even, instead of doing 5 defensive linemen, where like Daron Payne is the nose tackle, and then you have Jonathan Allen and Jazon Newton is like the 3 tech defensive tackles outside of that, I mean, I would even put Johnny Newton as like an edge rusher, like Dorrance Armstrong, Daron Payne, Jonathan Allen, Johnny Newton. I mean, you got to get him on the field as much as possible. I'm that high on him. And then, of course, John Ridgway is automatically going to make the roster because he's your best nose tackle. You need a double team eater, a guy to just plug up the middle, eat up the center and the guard, which would allow all of the rest of the defensive linemen to have one-on-one matchups across the board and allow these linebackers to blitz freely if you want them to, like Frankie Louvu, the best blitzing linebacker in the NFL. Bobby Wagner's Bobby Wagner. John Ridgway is basically the catalyst for allowing all of that to happen, keeping the linebackers clean and things like like that. And then outside of that, I don't really have much to say about anybody else. Remember, we signed Taylor Stallworth recently, but I believe he's just a practice body right now, a camp body, just so that we can keep everybody fresh and not have to play them way too much in practice. Now moving on to the edge rusher position, this one's very interesting, but it's kind of expected. I didn't expect them to go about it like this, but it makes a lot of sense to have outside linebacker as like a separate thing. Because when we think defensive end for real, we're talking about a 4-3 defensive end, a guy that's right there on the outside shoulder of the offensive tackle and has 3 hands in the dirt, at least, maybe even 4 at times, not standing up with 2. Outside linebacker, I'm thinking of a guy that's like standing up with only in a 2-point stance, both of their feet both of their hands off the ground, and they're just ready to go in. They're standing like this, waiting to go. Whereas, you know, defensive end are the bigger, stronger guys, the Chase Young, Montez Sweats builds. The outside linebackers are more the Von Miller builds, you know, so we'll see. And they may even cover occasionally and things like that. So that makes sense to differentiate that and separate those two. You have outside linebacker Dante Fowler, of course, is just starting outside linebacker. He's just situational pass rusher right now. So in obvious passing downs, 3rd and long, that's where he comes in and goes after the quarterback. You don't necessarily love him in run defense or setting the edge. So like 1st and 10, not so sure. And especially like 3rd and 1, definitely not. But 3rd and long, yeah, send Dante Fowler to go sick the quarterback, man. Go sick him, man. And then Jamin Davis is the backup for him. That makes a lot of sense. They're trying him at edge rusher. He's pretty much purely a defensive end at this point. They don't really see him as like an off-ball linebacker anymore. But I've been hearing that he is improving. The main problem that he's having that I've heard from sources right now is bending. He's very fast, he's very explosive, very quick, and he's working on like moves and nuance and things like that, like hand technique and stuff like that. But right now his bend is what's literally killing him right now. If he doesn't end up making this team, it's because of the lack of bend from what I'm hearing. Keandre Jones has been standing out in practice though, man. He had 2 training camp practices in a row. I can't remember which days it was. Maybe it was like 5 and 6 or 4 and 5, 6 or 7, something like that, where he really stood out like as an off-ball linebacker in the middle of the defense and on the edge making plays as well. So that's a guy to keep an eye on. And then of course defensive end wise, Cleveland Farrell and Dorrance Armstrong are your starters, and then KJ Henry is right behind them. But what's really interesting is that 7th round rookie draft pick by Adam Peters and Dan Quinn and these guys, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, is pretty up there. He's even above Andre Jones, who was with this team since last year, that even flashed last year in training camp. And then, of course, they're above Jalen Harrison. F.L. Bada will probably be ahead of a few of these guys if he were healthy, but I believe he's still on IR right now, the PUP list, whatever he's on, because he was hurt before this offseason even really started. I think he's been hurt since last year, something like that. But either way, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, I've been hearing good things about him. I believe my boy Linnell Willingham, who's been going to every single practice. Make sure you go follow him on Twitter, everything like that. He writes articles breaking down what happens in practice and all of that. Make sure you go follow him. Great insight for everything Commanders. But I believe he even said recently, maybe it was yesterday or today, earlier today, that Javonte Jean-Baptiste has really flashed at times. And back to my point that I presented earlier before we started diving into the different position groups, is that I believe that they even have him maybe even higher on the depth chart than he actually really is, because they want to throw him out there against some of the better Jets offensive linemen to see if he can hang. He's their 7th round pick. He's their baby. And they want to see if he can hang, because they're going to be a little bit more partial towards him than they would be like an Andre Jones, who's just still lingering from the previous regime. I mean, I'm not saying that as if Andre Jones doesn't have a place on this roster and he doesn't have any talent, but they didn't draft Andre Jones. They drafted Javonte Jean-Baptiste. So we'll see if they give him as many opportunities as he possibly can to succeed and show what he can do, and if he'll actually take advantage of that against the Jets in joint practices in the preseason. We'll see where that goes. Now, off-ball linebacker, this is entirely too obvious. I mean, this is pretty much exactly what it is. Bobby Wagner, Frankie Louvu, obviously your linebackers. And I thought it was interesting too, because they have like Frankie Louvu and those guys as outside linebackers, but those are completely different outside linebackers compared to at least Dante Fowler and Jamin Davis. Keandre Jones, I think he would be more so over here with Frankie Louvu, Anthony Pittman, and Mikael Walker. But either way, these are your off-ball linebackers. Even though both of these groups say outside linebacker, this outside linebacker group is definitely different from this one, because they're basically middle inside linebackers, whatever you want to call them. I just call them off-ball linebackers because they're not edge rushers attacking the quarterback snap after snap. Frankie Louvu and Anthony Pittman may do that occasionally, but that's not what they're primarily tasked with doing. And then either way, right behind them, Jordan McGee, been hearing great things about him. Our 5th round pick linebacker, loved his tape. I'm very excited about him. Athletic freak, but he's also further ahead in his development than a lot of people probably expected. Frankie Louvu has said multiple great things about him over the course of several training camp practices. practices. So expect him to basically be your third linebacker right now, I'm thinking. Anthony Pittman may make the team more so because of special teams than anything else. But apparently hasn't been bad as a linebacker, but he's definitely not one of your top three. I feel like it's Bobby Wagner, Frankie Luvu, gap, Jordan McGee, gap, everybody else that you see right now. But I even heard that Bo Bauer and Anthony Pittman have had chances to run with like the second stringers, and maybe even occasionally, I think I heard somebody say that they rotated in with the first stringers just a tad bit just to see what they could do. But they're ultimately backups. I don't know exactly how many of these guys we're going to end up keeping. Maybe only 4. Doubt we keep 5. I think, if anything, Anthony Pittman may get the nod over Bo Bauer and Mikael Walker, and that's probably your 4 linebackers right there to make the team. And that's a good group right there, I ain't gonna lie. Cornerback, obviously, Mike Sanford still is a separate corner. I don't know why they made these important distinctions everywhere else, but clearly Mike Sanford still is a starting slot corner. And then this showed me that Noah Igbenogany and Q Blue Kelly are also slot corners. The fact that they're in the same area is Mike Sanford still the same row. Those are your slot corners right there. Mike Sanford still is already wrapped up that starting slot position. I mean, I'm not surprised even since the day we drafted him. And then based on what we're hearing in training camp, he's even better than what we expected, especially sooner than we expected. I'm expecting Mike Sanford still to potentially compete for Defensive Rookie of the Year. I mean, the hype is that high right now on what he's been doing in training camp practice. Again, the one fumble that I've heard between Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler so far is when Mike Sanford still snuck up behind Brian Robinson. It was like a big run too. Like, it was a big gain, and Mike Sanford still was like, nah, and then basically punched the ball out. That's a playmaker right there. And you know Dan Quinn and Joe Wood Jr., if they covet anything, is playmaking. They didn't lead the NFL in turnovers with that Dallas Cowboys defense for the past 3 years for no reason. That is one of the main traits they're looking for. Mike Sanford still is just naturally that. Great ball skills as a former receiver and things like that. And that's why he looks good in special teams. That's why he's probably surprising some people, because some people don't realize that he used to be a receiver. So that's why he's so good with the ball in his hands, trying to actually take it to the house and things like that. But I mean, enough about him, I guess, because he's different. We're good there. We're good to go. Best slot corner the Commanders have had since I can remember, I would argue, already. Even as a rookie, I think he's going to go out there and play at least 70% of snaps. The only reason he's not on the field is because he's tired. There's no matchup to where I feel like Mike Sanford still doesn't make sense. I think even in goal line situations, with how good he is against the run, way better than somebody his small stature should be, I think he's going to play as much as possible. Benjamin St. Juste and Michael Davis, for some reason, are your starting corners on this depth chart, which is really, really weird, because there was a time where Tariq Castro-Fields, they kind of threw him out there with the starters against Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, those guys, in like an experiment of like, okay, you've been balling against the backups, but show me what you could do against the starters. And guess who was the certified starting corner next to him? Because this is the guy that's like arguably highest on the depth chart right now, Emmanuel Forbes. So when I saw that he was a backup on the depth chart, I was like, what is this? This is probably the most incorrect part out of this entire depth chart. And I have a lot of things to nitpick, but this one, I'm not even like the biggest Forbes fan, but not even just based on like how he's done in training camp, like going toe-to-toe with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson and those guys. He's improved vastly since last year. Even ignoring that, how about just snaps wise? Similar to De'Ami Brown, Emmanuel Forbes has been out there with the starters more than any other corner on this depth chart, at least out of the outside corners. I'm not sure about Mike Sanford still, but even times when Benjamin St. Juste was with the backups, Forbes would be with the starters. Michael Davis has mostly been with the backups this whole training camp. He's gotten a few starting snaps, had a couple of starting days, but Emmanuel Forbes has probably had the most starting snaps out of any outside corner on this team. It's amazing to me that he's a backup on this depth chart. I'm not exactly sure what the strategy is here. I really don't know. Maybe Dan Quinn's just trying to motivate him and show him that, yo, you got to go out there and earn it. But they've literally been conducting practices as if Emmanuel Forbes is a starter. Again, when they wanted to boost Tariq Castro-Fields up the depth chart just to kind of get a view and break down to see, can you hang with the starting wide receivers? Emmanuel Forbes is the guy starting opposite of him. He's been like the staple starting corner. No matter what mix-up you do, you want to give Michael Davis some reps, then throw him out there with Forbes. Like, Forbes has been the most consistent starting corner on this team since training camp. So this blew my mind. I just thought that was really interesting. But Tariq Castro-Fields is your fourth corner. Like, if we only keep 4 outside corners, is Tariq Castro-Fields over Chiggy Anusium, even though he's shown flashes, he has some talent to him, he has a ceiling. That's probably like a priority practice squad guy if he ends up not making the team. Over James Pierre, over Nick Whiteside, over all of those guys, Tariq Castro-Fields is destined to make this roster as the 4th outside corner. Again, he's even had times where he's been out there with the starters because he looks so good against the second stringer. So just to let you know, those are at the very worst your starting outside corners, and I'm starting to like them more than I thought I would heading into this season. And then we also, of course, lastly, defensively wise, your safeties, your starting safeties, like we've been saying for months now, since voluntary OTAs, have been Quan Martin at free safety and Jeremy Chin at strong safety. But similar to De'Ami Brown, not as your 3rd best wide receiver according to the depth chart, and Emmanuel Forbes is not one of your starting outside corners, Percy Butler is higher on the depth chart than Derek Forrest and Jeremy Reeves based on what's been going on in practice. I don't know why in this depth chart heading into the Jets joint practice and preseason game that he's that far down, but Percy Butler has been your 3rd safety. John Comm, I believe, was Logan Paulson. Maybe they were talking together. I can't remember who exactly said it, but they basically said that, you know, usually we're only out there with 2 safeties because how do you take Mike Sanders still off the field? But when they have had a 3rd safety on the field, it's been Quan Martin, Jeremy Chin, and Percy Butler. Now, granted, Derek Forrest has been dealing with injuries, but even before he was dealing with injuries, he was out there with the 3rd string. Because Percy Butler is higher on the depth chart than him. Now, Jeremy Reeves is going to make the team because he's an elite special teamer. He's all-pro Revo for a reason. He made all-pro as the best special teamer in the NFC a couple of years ago. And then he got hurt last year. I'm expecting him to get back to his elite special team status. So he's going to make the team because of that. But depth chart-wise, I think Percy Butler is even ahead of him right now. I truly believe that Percy Butler is your 3rd safety, so I thought that was weird. Then Dominique Hampton is interesting because he's kind of like the Jeremy Chin, Tyler Owens build, and that's what's confusing me because Tyler Owens, Dominique Hampton, and Jeremy Chin have like basically the same. Nobody else on this roster is as big and long and as quick as those guys. Like, they're just that weird, specific freak athlete kind of situation. Dominique Hampton way less than Jeremy Chin and Tyler Owens, but he's still like the tight end eraser. Jeremy Chin, Dominique Hampton, and Tyler Owens are probably build-wise, maybe not like actual production and play-wise yet, especially on Tyler Owens' part, but like build-wise, they are like the tight end erasers. We need to take away a team's best tight end. Those are the guys that are best built for it because they're big, long, and fast. They're not one or the other. And so I just thought it was weird that like Dominique Hampton and Jeremy Chin are strong safeties, but Tyler Owens is a free safety. But then again, I guess it makes sense because Tyler Owens is arguably one of the most athletic guys in the entire NFL. Is he one of the best guys in the NFL? I'm not saying that at all. But if we're just talking about pure athletic profile, I mean, he's an absolute alien. Matter of fact, since people keep questioning it, let me go bring up his stats again, man. Just to run this back from his draft profile, man. 6'2", 216 pounds, probably already at 220. He had a 95th percentile wingspan of 79 to 6/8 inch arms. He had a 41-inch vertical. He had the longest broad jump of any of the defensive backs out of the entire combine at 146, and he was projected to run a 4.3 flat 40 time before he hurt himself at the combine. Like pure, absolute alien, made in the lab athlete, dog. I mean, you can make an argument that Tyler Owens is one of the most athletic players in the entire NFL. Again, is he one of the best? Not yet. And he may never, ever even get close to being that because he's still so raw. Football isn't just about being a freak athlete. It's also knowing the game. It's about, especially at the safety position, IQ, awareness, anticipation, knowing where to be and getting there sooner based on you're already making those steps that way. It doesn't matter if you run a 4.3. A guy that runs a 4.6, if he knows the play and is able to read the offense quicker than you, he can get to where he needs to be sooner than you because he started moving that way before you did. That 4.3 speed doesn't make up for a lack of IQ and awareness and anticipation. So that's why he's still not a really good football player yet. You could argue maybe not even a good one, even though I believe he is leading our entire team in interceptions so far this offseason. So I think there's a good chance that he can make the team. But my point is, absolute freak athlete, unlimited ceiling, all pro ceiling. Like they don't make Tyler Owenses. They just don't. This is a one-of-a-kind athlete. Jeremy Chin is right up there with them as like Tyler Owens 1A, Jeremy Chin 1B is the most athletic guys on our entire team. And I'm rooting for him to make the team, but I understand why they have him that farther down the depth chart, even though he has been making plays. I'm pretty sure with as raw as his tape was coming out of college, I'm pretty sure even though he does have a couple of interceptions to his name right now in training camp, I wouldn't be surprised if he's still very raw and he's very inconsistent, and then all of the times we're not hearing about him is because he's making bad plays. We've heard about some of his highlights, but I highly doubt he's been perfect at all. But again, this is a great safety group. I'm not gonna lie, one of our deepest positions on the team, I would argue. I feel like a lot of people have really slept on how deep this safety group is. Like, somebody's gonna end up not making this roster, and we're either gonna have to store them away on the practice squad and use them as a protected practice squad player, or another team is gonna scoop them up, and at worst, one of these guys back here for us is gonna probably end up being like a second stringer at worst, maybe even eventually a starter. I mean, we have so much safety depth, it's absolutely insane. We went from being so worried about the safety position to now it being one of our deepest position groups, man. Derek Forrest is on the edge. He's on the outside looking in. He may not make this 53-man roster. It's not safe. I wouldn't put money on it. I don't see why he shouldn't. Like, I think with his talent, he should make it. I'm not exactly understanding why he's out there with the third stringer so consistently, and then since then he's even been hurt, so that hasn't helped his case. Talent wise, he should make this team, but just based on how this regime is treating him, it doesn't look too good for him. Just like Ricky Stromberg, I've heard a lot of great things about him from the previous regimes, at least the players, and this regime just doesn't seem to like him very much either. So we'll see where this goes. And then lastly, we still got to talk about special teams. Of course, your starting punter is Tressway, even though we have brought in a couple of punters, but that's more so to prepare for the Jets because Tressway is a left-footed kicker. I've talked about this in several videos, but just in case if you missed it, Tressway is a left-footed kicker. We brought in 2 right-footed punters so that our returners that you see at the bottom have a chance to practice and get used to fielding punts and just seeing it come from a different angle from a right-footed punter that the Jets have. So basically, to prepare for the Jets going up to these joint practices in preseason, they brought in some right-footed kickers so that they kind of get like get ahead of the process of adjusting to that before they have to do it against the Jets. So, but Tressway is your starting punter. He's not hurt or anything. He's good to go. Then your starting kicker right now, I guess, is Ramiz Ahmed, but you got to remember he was the backup to Chris Blewett, and that should tell you everything you need to know. He was the backup for Chris Blewett in the XFL, and then he's actually been doing better than Riley Patterson so far in camp. He's made more field goals. He's missed less field goals. So right now, Ramiz Ahmed is technically our starting kicker. He's winning the kicker competition, but that means that we need to bring in more kickers because I don't like either of those guys. I'm not going to lie to you. Tyler Ott, of course, we're going from one of the worst long snappers I've ever seen in my life to a Pro Bowl long snapper in Tyler Ott, so I'm very excited about that. Huge upgrade there. Shouts out to the Commanders for making sure they got that one figured out. But then Brandon McManus had to go and do what he did or whatever happened, whatever he accused of, did it, whatever. I'm not here to debate about that, but just you really messed us up with this kicker situation, dog. Somebody did us dirty. And then either way, kick returner and punt returner wise, I thought this was interesting. Noah Igbenogany is one of your starting kick returners. I did not hear a word of this. I haven't heard any news from any reporter, any fan that's gone to practice that said Noah Igbenogany has looked really good as a returner. If anything, it's literally been Casimir Allen and Mike Sanford still standing out. Now, I understand Mike Sanford still is too valuable on defense to use him as a returner. I get that. But where did Noah Igbenogany come from? And then also, why is he above Casimir Allen? I thought Casimir Allen had the edge here. So this is one of those ones where I feel like, just like De'Ami Brown, not one of the starting receivers, Emmanuel Forbes, not one of the starting corners, I feel like this is another one of the lies on the depth chart. I don't know if they're just trying to hide it from other teams. I don't know what the strategy is here, but Casimir Allen has to be above Noah Igbenogany as far as kick returners go. And then punt returner wise, Jamison Crowder, I guess, is winning that. We'll see where that goes. If he makes the team, it's only going to be because of that. I think he's a solid receiver, but we have so much talent in the receiver room right now, especially, again, like I talked about earlier, that specific niche of small, quick, shifty slot receiver type of guys. We have so many guys like that that are only, I mean, now granted, he is the veteran, but Olamide Zaccheaus is also somewhat of a veteran. Maybe he hasn't played as long as a Jamison Crowder, but he's also not as young and raw as like Casimir Allen, Mitchell Tinsley, and those guys. But either way, we have some other guys that could do the same thing as him on offense, and arguably even better, at the very least quicker and faster and things like that, since they're younger and more athletic. So if he makes the team, it's going to be because he won the punt returner job. That's if they feel like he's that good at it. I mean, because if there's a guy that's like close behind him in punt returns, maybe not quite as good, like 95% of what Jamison Crowder is as a punt returner, but then that same player is better than Jamison Crowder as a receiver, they may just go ahead and side with that guy. So Jamison Crowder, you're gonna have to really stand out as a punt returner to make this team, and hopefully stand out a little bit more as a receiver, because I haven't really heard much from him this training camp receiving wise. Then Jahan Dotson, of course, is interesting, even though it makes a lot of sense, because Jahan Dotson is arguably, especially now that Curtis Samuel is gone, arguably one of our shiftiest receivers. Like, he's definitely shiftier than Terry McLaurin. I love Terry McLaurin. He's our best receiver overall. But if we're talking about punt returns, making a guy miss out in open space, Jahan Dotson is arguably one of the best guys on our team at that. I feel like that is very underrated about him, and a lot of fans don't realize that about him, that this is a guy that could juke people out of their socks and their shorts, man. And so I'm not surprised there, but I don't think that would ultimately end up actually happening in the season, because I feel like, just like Mike Sandersdale, he's too valuable to throw back there on special teams and put him in additional harm's way, even more than he naturally is going to be just from playing football. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Please stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. I really appreciate y'all. I thought this video was going to be 30 minutes long. I didn't expect it to be 55. So I really appreciate y'all for staying around this long. I also wanted to point out a couple of more things before we go. First of all, I don't know if y'all noticed, but out of that entire depth chart, only one player from the 2023 class that we just drafted last year that Ron Rivera and those guys put together is a starter, and that's only Quan Martin, even though technically it's two, because Emmanuel Forbes is a starter. I don't know what they're talking about there, but I thought that was really interesting. And then also I do want to point out the fact that only 8 of the 22 offensive and defensive starters that were starting on last year's teams are starting according to this depth chart. But again, I will up that to 9 of 22, because Emmanuel Forbes is starting, dog. I don't care what you say. Emmanuel Forbes is starting. But again, just basically best case scenario for Ron Rivera, we at worst have 13 new starters compared to last year. So that should tell you everything you need to know. Rio Robinson brought up a great point on that too as well. Make sure you follow him on Twitter, follow him on YouTube. Great at everything, man. Funny, great insight on everything. That's my dog over there. Tell him I sent you. But either way, he brought up a great point that, like, he said, like, stop talking about that same old Washington stuff, because we don't even know who we are at this point. Nobody knows what this Washington team is. So I don't like hearing that either. Also, shouts out to Pro Football Focus, because they did like a little breakdown of the highest graded returning commanders overall, and I felt like this is a good time to bring it up. Samuel Cosmi is the highest with an 82.1 grade from last year. Then it's Brian Robinson with a 75.3. Then Terry McLaurin 75.1. Andrew Wiley 69.9. And then Jamin Davis 67.6. Out of all of the top, not even just starters, returning players in general, those are your top 5 according to Pro Football Focus, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, man, that is definitely the end of this video. Definitely leave a like on this video on the way out. I really appreciate y'all. Of course, let me know in the comment section how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Do you agree or disagree with any of my points? Do you agree or disagree with their depth charts? All of that type of stuff. Again, I've been super busy this week, but I'm gonna try my best to find some time to sit down and read and reply to as many comments as possible. And of course, also, man, remember that this video was sponsored by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino. And please make sure y'all gamble responsibly, man. Please do that one, if anything. If you don't listen to nothing else, please make sure you're gambling responsibly out here, and you're doing it with my boys at BetUS. I really appreciate y'all. I'm gonna catch y'all later. I'm gonna catch y'all, of course, with a training camp breakdown of what happens tomorrow. Well, by the time a lot of y'all watching this, today, August 8th, joint practice with the Jets Thursday. Can't wait. Catch y'all later. I'm out.